Hello everyone. Today we will be discussing Beethoven's Piano Sonata number 10 in G major, specifically aspects of its form. Now, the form can be understood as three larger umbrella sections that make up the whole piece. And this overall form is very comparable to the context of a relationship. And in this lecture, we will be comparing it to actually my parents' marriage. This is kind of cute. The first section is like an introduction section, so it really introduces our three major themes, and that's very much like a story where you introduce the major characters or protagonists of your story. So we have our first major melody or theme that is introduced. Listen. So Beethoven has now given us our first character. In the context of my parents' story, that first character is my dad. Right after this first theme plays, Beethoven puts in some filler music until introducing our second character. And that's very analogous to a camera panning over. So now we're changing locations to meet our second character. And this transitional music sets us up to meet our second character because in the beginning our characters don't come from the same home. Like obviously my mom and dad didn't live in the same house growing up because I don't know, even Koreans don't like incestual marriage. So we're now meeting our second character that comes from a different place, and that character is my mom. In Beethoven's story, this second character is another theme. As you've heard, this second theme is quite different in mood from the first theme. And this is another thing that is important but you may not have caught, is that the second theme is in a different key from the first theme. The first theme was in G major, and the second theme is in D major. And this is important because, as I earlier mentioned, my mom and dad in my parents' story came from different locations. They came from different homes. Musically, in the form, Beethoven sets these different homes by setting the two themes in different keys. And so those are our two main characters. Now, what Beethoven does after this is he closes the introduction with a third character. Now, going back to my parents' story, this third character is more of a foreshadowing. So we'll set the third character in that story aside for the moment. But in Beethoven's story, what this third character does is it puts a finality or a conclusive ending on the introduction, thus ending the first section. Moving on to the second section of our form. This is the part of the piece where musically the composer takes the themes presented in the first section and kind of takes them on a musical journey, putting little twists and turns on these now familiar melodies to kind of make them new and exciting and kind of just to like push them along, like, you know, how you would push a characters through a plot. And so this is like my parents' story because obviously they don't just stay in the intro section of their lives. They move on and they go on their own separate paths and they kind of form their own little life journeys. We will now have a dramatic reenactment that draws parallels between my parents' story and the middle section in Beethoven's Piano Sonata. Alright, now I'm off to engineering school. Alright, now I'm off to all-girls university to major in French. And so now we're nearing the end of our middle section, and what the end of the second section does is it leads into the third and final section of the form. And so musically, Beethoven does this by kind of thinning down the texture, slowing the action down, so it can, have this like suspenseful build-up to the concluding section. And that's very much like my parents' lives because the action in their lives kind of slows down and they, transition. They somehow lead into this next stage in life, known as marriage. And so that kind of takes us to the last concluding section of the form. And musically, what this does is it wraps up everything that's come before. And And this is very much like life because marriage kind of wraps up all the relational junk from before. And musically, what happens is the themes that were presented in the first section, all three of them come back, and now they're in the same key. So it's not like half of this section is in G major, the other half is in D major. Now all of it is now in G major. And that's very much like marriage because you're taking these characters that come from very different backgrounds, from different homes, and you're now putting them in the same home. And Beethoven then uses the third theme that ended the first section to put a more conclusive ending on the entire piece as a whole. And so it not only ends the third section, it also ends the entire piece. And that's very much like my parents' lives because the third character, which was kind of, an afterthought in the first section of their lives, becomes a very important concluding section of their lives. And that third character is their babies, including me, which is really cute. And it really, puts a neat little bow on the story of their lives. And that's essentially how the third stage of their lives ends, and that's how the third stage or section of Beethoven's piano sonata ends. And so I hope you've enjoyed this kind of interesting analogy on the form of this particular sonata, and enjoy the concert.